Welcome to day 166, where we will be taking a look at 1 Kings 16, 2 Chronicles 15 to 16, and Colossians chapter 1. We've got God sending a prophet to the king Baasha with a warning from God, following God's great tradition of speaking truth to power. This is something that I think is very relevant to us today. We still have leaders who try to consolidate power and limit their accountability and responsiveness to others. We still get prophets telling us God's message that we don't always want to hear. But I also think that social media and journalists and professors and politicians and community forums can also be times for leaders to stay connected to people in their communities. Whenever we close ourselves off from the messages of others, we tend to get into trouble in one way or another. After Baasha ended his evil reign, Elah was king for 2 short years before getting assassinated. Then Zimri steps up and kills all remaining relatives of Baasha during his 7 days of rule. Then Omri becomes king and manages to last for 12 years. He didn't rule with any more justice and mercy and faithfulness than the kings before him, and his son Ahab followed him for the next 22 years. Ahab managed to be more evil than the kings before him. Great achievement. He married Jezebel and turned to the god Baal for worship. He also worshipped Asherah, another local goddess. Jericho was restored and fortified during Ahab's rule, but Joshua's predictions of terrible consequences for taking the city that was set aside for God came true. Chronicles today starts with Asa and Judah and reminds us that while God was unhappy, even angry with the kings and people of Israel, God was willing to be found by the people if they returned to worship God. Asa listened to a prophet and turned to God and cleaned out remnants of other religious practices and gods. He called an assembly of the people, and all together they renewed their covenant or contract with God through offerings and worship. While this was a great start, he didn't manage to get rid of all the stuff of the other gods, which always creates problems in the end, but he tried hard to be faithful to God. Then the time of peace ended and Baasha of Israel attacked. Asa took gold and silver and gave it to a neighboring leader to help fight against Baasha, which wasn't the right idea. God wanted Judah to turn to God for help and not rely on their own resources like neighboring peoples. Asa imprisoned the prophet who brought this message to the king, and the king got very angry. After 39 years of rule, Asa got sick and didn't turn to God for help. He died in his 41st year of reign. Lesson here: be faithful and always turn first to God. So, how often do we pray? How often do we look to our own resources first? Now, moving on, we get to start on the letter to the believers in Colossae. One thing to keep in mind as we read is that this is a letter to a specific group of people at a specific time in a specific place. The letter was found to be useful for many believers, so it was copied and shared and eventually made the cut for the New Testament. But we always have to remember that the author is not writing to us, but to the people of Colossae. Some of them were thinking of Jesus as an important figure, similar to Buddha and Muhammad and Socrates, and not as the preeminent Son of God. In this letter, Paul encourages them to see Jesus as the focal point of their lives, that Jesus is unique among other religious leaders in human history. But Paul also wants to encourage belief and changed life choices without arrogance or violence. Paul wants us to use the humility of Jesus to bring the message of Jesus to others. So let's be kind, let's be warm when sharing the gifts of Jesus with those around us. Starting into the letter, once again, we have a lovely intro from Paul and Timothy that leads into the common gratitude and expressions of thanksgiving that Paul so often offers. Lesson for us: how often do we say thanks and share our gratitude with those around us? In the coming days, see when you have a chance to throw in a few sentences of appreciation and see how the people around you respond. So Paul is always also praying for the people in the various communities that he meets in his travels. Another role model for us: how often are we praying for the people we know in our lives, and not just prayers for healing in times of struggle or illness, but also prayers for expanding faith lives and spiritual growth. Through Jesus, we see God's purpose in the world and all the creation God brought into being. Paul explains how important Jesus is and celebrates the people who have come to believe in Jesus. So the final message for this chapter, don't add more to the message. Just focus on Jesus, no more, no less. This is a good reminder for us today as well, which is why this letter made it into the Bible. Take care, and we'll see you next time.